The matriarch of the Draconth Empire descended upon Meridian Hub with the weight of centuries behind her. She was ancient beyond human comprehension, and her scales shimmered with colors that had no names in any language. Jinho knew her ceremonial. Guard flanked her as she walked through the station's corridors, and crowds parted before her like water before a stone. Jinho watched the procession through his stall's front window and felt his heart sinking. The matriarch was not coming to negotiate. She was coming to end something. Varathis stood frozen behind the counter with her claws trembling at her sides. "I should go to her," she said in a voice that had lost all its strength. "Maybe if I surrender willingly, she will spare you. Stay where you are." Jinho walked to his cooking station and began preparing ingredients. His hands moved with practiced ease, even though every instinct screamed at him to run. "What are you doing?" Varathis asked with confusion overtaking her fear. "Cooking. The matriarch of the Draconth Empire is coming here and you are cooking. She will probably be hungry after her trip." Varathis stared at him like he had completely lost his mind. And perhaps he had, but Jinho had learned something important during his years of grief and wandering. When everything else was falling apart, you found something useful to do with your hands. The universe could not take away your dignity if you refused to stop working. He heard the guards entering his dining area, but he did not turn around. He heard the heavy footsteps of ancient claws on metal floors, but he kept chopping vegetables. He heard the silence that fell over everything as the matriarch herself stepped through his doorway. Only then did he set down his knife and turn to face her. The matriarch was enormous. Even hunched down to fit inside his small establishment, she towered over everything around her. Her eyes were the color of dying stars, and they held the cold wisdom of someone who had sacrificed countless children to politics and war. "You are the human," she said in a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. "Park Jinho," he replied with a bow that was respectful but not subservient. "Welcome to home kitchen." The guards tensed at his casual tone, but the matriarch raised one claw and they fell silent. "You have been harboring my daughter," she continued, "a disgrace to my bloodline, who should have had the decency to die quietly." Varathis made a small wounded sound behind the counter. Jinho stepped forward until he was standing between the princess and her mother. "With respect," he said, "I have been feeding a hungry child who was abandoned by people who should have protected her." The temperature in the room seemed to drop by several degrees. The guards reached for their weapons, but again, the matriarch stopped them with a gesture. "You dare to lecture me about protection?" she asked with dangerous softness. "I have ruled an empire for 600 years, and I have made harder choices than you could ever imagine." "I do not doubt it." Jinho gestured toward one of his few undamaged chairs. "Please sit and let me serve you a meal before you make any decisions." The matriarch's enormous eyes narrowed. "You think food will change my mind about what must be done here? I think you traveled a long way, and hospitality cost me nothing," Jinho said. "After you have eaten, you can do whatever you came to do, but at least you will not be hungry while doing it." For a long moment, no one moved. Then the matriarch made a sound that might have been laughter. "If dragons could laugh, you are either very brave or very foolish," she said. "People keep telling me that." The matriarch lowered herself onto the reinforced floor because no chair could support her weight. She waved at her guards, and they retreated to positions outside the stall. Jinho returned to his cooking station where Varathis was still frozen in terror. "Help me," he said quietly. "We are going to make this soup you learned last week." "I cannot," she whispered. "She will kill me the moment I approach her. Then we will die having fed one more hungry person, and there are worse ways to go." He pressed ladle into her trembling claws. "Trust me." Varathis looked at the ladle, and then at her mother, and then back at Jinho. Something shifted in her expression. The fear was still there, but underneath, it was something else, determination perhaps, or maybe just the stubborn human optimism she had absorbed during her weeks in his kitchen. She nodded and began preparing the ingredients. Mother and daughter did not speak while the meal was being prepared. The silence stretched between them like a canyon, filled with centuries of disappointment and grief. Jinho worked steadily and let the familiar rhythms of cooking calm his racing heart. When the soup was ready, Varathis carried it to her mother herself. Her claws shook, but she did not spill a single drop. The matriarch looked at the simple bowl and then at her daughter's face. "You made this?" she asked. "Jinho taught me." The matriarch hesitated for just a moment. Then she lowered her head and began to eat. Jinho had served thousands of meals during his years on Meridian Hub. He had watched aliens of 100 species taste human cooking for the first time, but he had never seen anyone react the way the matriarch did. She stopped after the first bite and simply stared at the bowl. Something changed in those ancient starlight eyes. Something cracked open. "When was the last time one of my children made food for me?" she said softly. "I cannot remember." Varathis did not answer. The matriarch finished the soup in silence and set down the empty bowl. When she looked up, there were tears on her scales. "I came here to erase a mistake," she said, "to eliminate evidence of a failed negotiation that embarrassed my empire." She turned her gaze to Varathis. "But you are not the same child I sent away, and I do not know what happened to you in this place, but you have changed." Varathis found her voice at last. "Jinho taught me that worth is not measured by political usefulness," she said. "He showed me that caring about someone's happiness, even when you gain nothing, is what makes life meaningful." The matriarch was silent for a long time. "Humans are a small species," she said finally, "insignificant in the grand scope of galactic politics." She rose to her full height and addressed Jinho directly. "But they have taught my daughter something that 600 years of empire could not." She turned to her guards and spoke in her native tongue. The words were harsh and ancient, but Jinho caught the tone of formal declaration. When she finished, the guards knelt before Varathis with their heads bowed. "I am announcing that my 7th daughter has forged a new alliance with the human species," the matriarch said. "She will remain here as our ambassador if she chooses." Varathis gasped. "Mother, I do not understand." "You have found something valuable in this place," the matriarch said. "Something I had forgotten existed." She looked at Jinho with an expression that might have been respect. "Perhaps I should visit more often." The matriarch departed with her guards, leaving Jinho and Varathis standing alone in the small stall. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Varathis began to laugh. It was a real laugh this time, full and joyful and completely uncontrolled. Jinho smiled and began cleaning up the kitchen. "We should change the name of this place," he said casually. "To what?" "Family Kitchen," he said. "Because that is what it is now." Varathis looked at him with tears streaming down her face. But they were happy tears this time. The tears of someone who had finally found where they belonged. The next morning, they opened the stall together, just like any other day. Customers came and went, food was served, and life continued in its ordinary way. But something had changed. The lonely human and the starving dragon had become family, and that was enough purpose for both of them. The syndicate did not make empty threats. Within 3 days of the representative's visit, Jinho found his supply lines cut off. Vendors who had sold him ingredients for years suddenly refused to take his orders. They apologized and looked away when he asked for explanations, but he already knew the answer. Someone with power and money had told them to stop doing business with him. The customers disappeared next. Regulars who visited his stall every morning simply stopped coming. When Jinho saw them in the corridors, they walked past without meeting his eyes. A few whispered warnings as they hurried by. "The syndicate is watching you. You should give them what they want. Get out while you still can." Jinho ignored all of them, kept cooking with whatever ingredients he had left. The vandalism started on the 5th night. He woke to the sound of breaking glass and ran downstairs to find his stall in ruins. The tables were overturned, and the chairs were smashed, and someone had written a message on his wall in red paint. Last warning. Varathis stood in the middle of the destruction with tears streaming down her face. "This is my fault," she said. "I brought this upon you, and I should never have stayed." Jinho picked up a broom and started sweeping broken glass into a pile. "Help me clean this up," he said. "We open in 4 hours." She stared at him with disbelief. "Did you not hear me?" she demanded. "They will not stop until they get what they want, and next time they might hurt you instead of your furniture. Then we will deal with that when it happens." He continued sweeping, as if they were discussing the weather. Varathis grabbed his arm and forced him to look at her. "Why?" she asked with desperation cracking her voice. "Why are you doing this for me when I am nothing to you?" Jinho set down his broom and met her eyes. "When my daughter was sick, I would have given anything to save her," he said. "I sold my home and my business and everything I owned, but it was not enough." He paused and took a breath. "I could not save Yuna, but I can choose to be the kind of person who helps when I see someone suffering, and that choice is the only thing that makes sense to me anymore." Varathis released his arm and stepped back. "You are doing this because of your dead child," she said slowly. "You are trying to save me because you could not save her." "Maybe," Jinho admitted. "Or maybe I just do not like bullies, and I refuse to let them win." He picked up the broom again and resumed sweeping. "Now help me clean up, or we really will not open on time." Word of the Syndicate's intimidation campaign spread through the human community on Meridian Hub. There were not many humans on the station, but they noticed when one of their own was being targeted. A retired freighter captain named Choi Sunhee visited the stall the next morning. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "I heard you have syndicate troubles," she said while examining the hastily repaired damage. "News travels fast." "It does when humans are involved," Sunhee replied. "We have a reputation in this sector, you know?" Jinho raised an eyebrow. "What kind of reputation?" "Weak and short-lived and technologically inferior," she said with a thin smile, "but also stubborn beyond all reason about certain things." She sat down at his counter and folded her hands. "The syndicate thinks they can pressure you into giving up the princess because you are just one man with a small business, but they are underestimating how annoying humans can be when we decide to make a point." Sunhee organized a scattered human community on the station over the following days. They could not match the syndicate's resources or connections, but they could make things difficult in other ways. Human merchants began documenting every act of intimidation and broadcasting the footage across open channels. Journalists from human news networks picked up the story, and suddenly the whole sector was watching a simple food vendor being bullied by one of the galaxy's most powerful criminal organizations. The Galactic Assembly sent formal inquiries about the situation. Trade commissioners expressed concerns about security on Meridian Hub. The syndicate had operated in shadows for so long that they did not know how to handle direct sunlight. Their representatives stopped visiting the stall, though Jinho knew they were still watching from a distance. Meanwhile, Varathis struggled with emotions she had never been taught to process. She had been raised to believe that political value determined personal worth. Useful children received attention and resources, while useless ones were discarded. Jinho had gained nothing from helping her. No wealth and no power and no alliance with her family. He had only earned enemies and expenses and sleepless nights. One evening after closing, she found him sitting in the empty dining area staring at a small holographic image in his palm. "Is that her?" she asked softly. "Your daughter." Jinho nodded without looking up. The image showed a young human girl with bright eyes and a wide smile. She was maybe 6 or 7 years old, and she was laughing at something outside the frame. Her name was Yuna, he said. This was taken 2 months before she got sick. Varathis sat down across from him. "She looks happy." She was happy. Jinho said. Every day was an adventure for her, and everything was amazing and wonderful. He closed his fist around. The projector and the image vanished. I keep this to remind myself what joy looks like, he said. Sometimes I forget. Varathis did not know what to say, so she simply sat with him in the silence. Outside, the station's sensors detected a massive energy signature entering the system. A Draconth warship had arrived. The news spread through Meridian Hub within minutes, and speculation exploded across every channel. The matriarch herself was on that ship. No one knew if she was coming to reclaim her daughter or to eliminate all evidence of royal disgrace, but everyone agreed that whatever happened next would change everything. 3 standard weeks passed, and Varathis changed in ways that surprised even herself. Her scales regained their luster, and the deep violet and silver patterns of her royal bloodline emerged once more. She no longer flinched at sudden noises or cowered when strangers approached the stall. The constant terror that had lived in her chest since the syndicate abandoned her began to fade, replaced by something she had never expected to feel again. Hope Jinho watched these changes with quiet satisfaction while teaching her the rhythms of his small business. Varathis learned quickly. Her royal education had included mathematics and logistics and administration, skills that were meant to help her manage palace affairs someday. Now she used them to track inventory and calculate profits and organize supply orders. Within 2 weeks, the stall was running more efficiently than it ever had before. You are too good at this, Jinho told her one morning while she reorganized his storage shelves. I am starting to feel useless. Varathis made a sound that might have been a laugh. She was learning to laugh again, though it still came awkwardly to her. You are not useless, she said. You cook, and I cannot do that. I can teach you. Her eyes widened with something like fear. Draconth do not cook, she said. It is work for servants. Jinho shrugged and handed her a vegetable peeler. You are not in the Empire anymore, and here everyone works together. He showed her how to peel and chop the vegetables he had bought from the station's hydroponic gardens. Varathis was clumsy at first, but her long fingers proved surprisingly dexterous when she understood the technique. She watched with fascination as he combined simple ingredients into something that smelled wonderful. Why do humans spend so much effort on food? She asked while stirring a pot under his supervision. It serves no practical advantage beyond basic nutrition. Comfort food is not about nutrition, Jinho explained. It is about feeling. He tapped his chest with one hand. When someone is sad or tired or lonely, a warm meal can make them feel better, and that matters as much as filling their stomach. Varathis considered this for a long moment. The Draconth do not have such concepts. She said finally, food is fuel and nothing more. Then the Draconth are missing out. She looked at him with an expression he had come to recognize over the past weeks. It was the look she wore when he said something that did not fit into her understanding of the universe. He saw it often. Jinho smiled and patted her shoulder in a gesture of reassurance. Different cultures do things differently, he said. Neither way is wrong, but I think food tastes better when you make it with love. Love. Varathis repeated the word like she was testing its weight. You mean affection for another person. I mean caring about their happiness even when you get nothing in return. He served 2 bowls of the soup they had made together and handed one to her. Humans believe that eating together creates family, he said. And family is not always about blood relations. Varathis looked down at the bowl in her claws and then back up at Jinho. Something shifted in her eyes, and he thought he saw the faintest glimmer of tears. She did not speak, but she did not need to. They ate their meal in comfortable silence while the morning rush of customers began to fill the corridor outside. Word had spread through the station about the Draconth princess working in a human food stall. Some visitors came out of curiosity, hoping to catch a glimpse of fallen royalty serving tables. Others came because they had heard the food was actually quite good. A few came with darker intentions. Jinho noticed a Corvus Syndicate representative the moment he entered the dining area. The alien was a Velashi with pale blue skin and calculating eyes that scanned the stall like a predator assessing prey. He wore expensive clothes, and his posture radiated the quiet confidence of someone used to getting what he wanted. Park Jinho, the Velashi said smoothly as he approached the counter. My employers would like to speak with you about the interesting employee you have acquired. Varathis froze in the middle of cleaning a table, and Jinho saw her old fear returning like a shadow. He stepped between her and the representative with a calm expression that did not match his racing heart. I am busy right now, Jinho said. Maybe you could come back never. The Velashi smiled with too many teeth. My employers are prepared to offer substantial compensation for the return of their property. She is not property. That is a matter of perspective, the representative said. Political circumstances have changed since we last saw the princess, and she has value again. He leaned closer and lowered his voice. The matriarch is weakening, and a hostage from her bloodline could prove very useful in the coming months. Jinho felt cold anger settling into his bones. Leave my stall, he said quietly. Now, you do not understand what you are refusing, the Velashi warned. Humans have no allies in this sector, and you are making enemies you cannot afford. I said leave. The representative held his gaze for a long moment, and then shrugged elegantly. Very well, he said. But my employers are patient, and they always get what they want in the end. He turned and walked away without looking back. Jinho let out a breath he had not realized he was holding, and turned to check on Varathis. She was standing behind the counter with her claws gripping the edge so hard that the metal was bending. I should leave, she said in a voice barely above a whisper, before I destroy everything you have built here. Jinho walked over and gently loosened her grip on the counter. You are not going anywhere, he said firmly. You do not understand what they will do, she protested. The syndicate does not make empty threats, and they will hurt you to get to me. Jinho thought about Yuna. He thought about all the things he would have done differently if he had known their time together was limited. He thought about second chances and the strange ways the universe sometimes offered them. Then he picked up a clean apron and held it out to her. The breakfast rush starts in an hour, he said. We should get ready. Varathis stared at him like he had lost his mind. Maybe he had. But for the first time in 3 years, Jinho felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The Draconth Royal Shuttle docked at Meridian Hub with all the ceremony that such an arrival demanded. Station officials rushed to prepare the diplomatic receiving area and security. Teams cleared entire corridors for the distinguished visitors. But the shuttle remained sealed for 3 days, and no one emerged. Jinho watched the news reports with growing confusion while he prepared his morning ingredients. The Draconth were known for their dramatic entrances and their complete disregard for the schedules of lesser species. Perhaps they were simply making everyone wait as a display of power. It would not be the first time. Meanwhile, the young dragon in the maintenance corridor returned every night for food. Jinho learned her name. On the second evening, when she finally found enough strength to speak more than a few words, Varathis Kalshin, the seventh daughter of the Draconth matriarch herself, Jinho nearly dropped his cooking pot when she told him royalty, actual royalty, was eating scraps from his garbage corridor and sleeping on cold metal floors. Why? He asked before he could stop himself. Why are you here like this? Varathis looked away and her tail curled around her body like a shield. I was sent as a hostage, she said in her broken galactic common, part of a treaty between my mother and the Corvus Syndicate. Jinho had heard of the Syndicate. Everyone had. They were a loose alliance of criminal organizations that controlled the black markets across several sectors. Powerful enough that even the Draconth Empire had to negotiate with them sometimes. The treaty failed. Varathis continued. My mother could not give them what they wanted, so the agreement collapsed, and they just left you here. They brought me to this station and abandoned me," she said with bitterness that cut through her exhaustion. It was a message to my mother that her daughter was worth nothing to them. Jinho sat down heavily on an overturned crate. "Your mother must be sending people to find you," he said. "That royal shuttle that just arrived must be here for you." Varathis made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had any joy in it. "No," she said. "The Draconth do not rescue failed political assets because to acknowledge me would be to acknowledge defeat." She lifted her head and met his eyes directly for the first time. "My mother declared me dead 3 cycles ago, and as far as my people are concerned, I no longer exist." Jinho felt anger rising in his chest like fire. What kind of mother abandoned her child over political calculations? What kind of society threw away their young because they had become inconvenient? He thought about Yuna and how he would have burned down worlds to save her if he could have. The Draconth matriarch had the power to save her daughter, and she had chosen not to use it. That is wrong. Jinho said flatly, "I do not care about your politics or your treaties, and that is just wrong." Varathis stared at him with an expression he could not read. Perhaps no one had ever said such things to her before. Perhaps no one had ever been foolish enough to criticize the matriarch in front of one of her children. "You are strange for a human," she said finally. "I get that a lot." Jinho stood up and brushed dust from his apron. "Listen," he said, "I cannot fix your problems, and I cannot protect you from empires or syndicates, but I can offer you a job." Varathis blinked her large eyes. In confusion, "A job, washing dishes and cleaning tables and helping me run my food stall," he said. "The pay is terrible, but you get meals and a place to sleep that is not a garbage corridor." He pointed toward the small storage room behind his kitchen. "There is a spare cot in there, and it is not comfortable, but it is warm and dry, and nobody will bother you. Why would you do this?" Varathis asked with suspicion creeping into her voice. "What do you want from me?" Jinho understood her caution. She had been used as a bargaining chip her entire life, and kindness without conditions must have seemed like a trap. "I want you to show up on time and work hard," he said simply. "Everything else is your business, and not mine." He turned to leave, but paused at the entrance to the corridor. "The morning shift starts in 6 hours, and you should get some sleep before then." Varathis did not respond, and Jinho did not push. He returned to his stall and finished his preparations for the next day. When he came back to check on her an hour later, she was gone from the corridor. For a moment his heart sank with disappointment. Then he heard a soft sound from the storage room. Varathis was curled up on the old cot with her tail wrapped around herself for warmth. She was already asleep. Jinho pulled a spare blanket from a shelf and draped it carefully over her shivering body. She stirred but did not wake. He stood there for a long moment, watching her breathe and thinking about all the ways this decision could go wrong. Other species on the station had already warned him about getting involved with Draconth politics. The syndicate might come back to finish what they started. The matriarch's agents might appear to silence witnesses to royal shame. Station security might decide that harboring a disgraced noble was too much trouble. Jinho considered all these possibilities, and then he shrugged and went to bed anyway. He had stopped worrying about consequences years ago. When you lost the thing you loved most in the world, everything else seemed small by comparison. That night, he dreamed of Yuna. She was running through fields of tall grass, on earth with sunlight in her hair and laughter on her lips. He called out to her, but she did not turn around. She just kept running toward a horizon he could not reach. He woke to the sound of crying. It was coming from the storage room, and the words were in a language he did not understand. Jinho got up and walked to the door, but he did not open it. Instead, he sat down with his back against the wall and began to hum softly. It was a lullaby he used to sing to Yuna when she had nightmares. The melody was simple and gentle, and it had always calmed her fears. After a while, the crying stopped. Jinho kept humming until the first light of the artificial dawn crept through his windows. Then he got up and started preparing breakfast. He had a hungry dragon to feed, and that was enough purpose for one day. Meridian Hub never slept, and it never stayed quiet for long. The massive space station sat at the crossroads of 12 major trade routes, and millions of beings passed through its corridors. Every standard cycle, humans called it the galaxy's busiest. Trucks stop, and they were not entirely wrong. Park Jin-ho wiped down his counter for the third time that hour and watched the endless stream of aliens walking past his small food stall. He had named the place Home Kitchen because that was exactly what he wanted it to be. A reminder of something warm and familiar in the cold emptiness of space. 3 years had passed since he left Earth, and he still was not sure if running away had been the right choice. His daughter Yuna had been 7 years old when the sickness took her. The doctors had tried everything, and Jin-ho had spent every credit he owned searching for a cure. None of it mattered in the end. After the funeral, he could not bear to stay in the apartment where her laughter still echoed in every room, so he sold everything and bought passage to the farthest place he could afford. Now he cooked simple human food for aliens who had never tasted rice or soup or anything made with love rather than nutrient efficiency. Most of them thought it was strange, but some of them came back for more. That was enough for Jin-ho. He found purpose in feeding strangers, and that purpose kept him moving forward one day at a time. The dinner rush had ended an hour ago, and Jin-ho was preparing to close when he heard something in the maintenance corridor behind his stall. It was a soft sound like something scraping against metal. He grabbed a cooking ladle and walked toward the noise, because curiosity had always been his weakness. The corridor was dark and filled with pipes and cables that carried the station's lifeblood. To distant sectors, Jin-ho activated his wrist light and swept the beam across the cramped space. 2 eyes reflected back at him, and he nearly dropped his ladle. In surprise, a creature was huddled against the wall next to his waste disposal unit. It was long and serpentine, with a body covered in scales that might have been beautiful once. Now those scales were dull and flaking, and the creature's ribs showed clearly beneath its skin. Jin-ho had seen many alien species during his time on Meridian Hub, but he recognized this one immediately. A draconth. The ancient dragon-like species was famous throughout the galaxy for their pride and their power, and their complete unwillingness to associate with lesser beings. They ruled a vast empire spanning hundreds of star systems, and their word was law in nearly a quarter of known space. What was one of them doing in a garbage corridor, looking like death itself? The draconth flinched when his light touched her face, and Jin-ho saw fear in those vertical pupils. Real fear, the kind that came from expecting violence at any moment. He lowered his ladle and took a slow step backward. "I am not going to hurt you," he said in Galactic Common. The draconth did not respond, but she also did not run. Her body was trembling, and Jin-ho realized she probably could not run even if she wanted to. She was too weak. He thought about calling station security, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the way she looked at him like a cornered animal waiting for the final blow. Maybe it was the memory of another pair of frightened eyes from long ago. Yuna had looked at him the same way near the end when the pain became too much, and she did not understand why her father could not make it stop. Jin-ho turned and walked back to his stall without saying another word. He heated a pot of water and added rice and salt and a few vegetables he had been saving for his own dinner. The porridge was simple, but it was warm and filling, and it was the kind of food that healed more than just hunger. He carried the bowl back to the corridor and set it down a few meters away from the draconth. Then he backed away and sat against the opposite wall with his hands visible and empty. "Eat," he said quietly. "You need it more than I do." The draconth stared at him for a long moment. Jin-ho could see her nostrils flaring as she caught the scent of the food. Finally, her hunger overcame her fear. She crawled forward on legs that shook with every movement and lowered her head to the bowl. Jinho watched her eat and felt something crack open in his chest. He did not know her name or her story or why she was starving in a maintenance corridor, but he knew that no living creature should have to scavenge from garbage to survive. The Draconth finished the porridge in moments and looked up at him with an expression he could not read. Tears were running down her scaled face and dripping onto the metal floor. "Thank you," she whispered in broken galactic common. "I had forgotten what warm food tasted like." Jinho nodded and stood up slowly so he would not startle her. "I will leave more tomorrow," he said. Same place and same time. He returned to his stall and finished closing for the night. His hands moved automatically through the familiar routine. While his mind churned with questions, he knew better than to ask. The Draconth did not want his questions. She wanted his food and his silence, and maybe just the knowledge that one person in this enormous station did not see her as worthless. Jinho could give her that much at least. He was locking the front shutters when his personal communicator buzzed with a station-wide alert. The message scrolled across the small screen in glowing letters, and Jinho felt his stomach drop. "Attention, all residents and visitors, a Draconth Royal Shuttle has entered Meridian Hub space and will dock within 6 standard hours. All personnel are reminded to observe proper protocols when interacting with Drak nobility. Failure to show appropriate respect may result in diplomatic incidents." Jinho looked back toward the dark corridor where the starving dragons still hid Royal Shuttle. He thought about those dull scales and frightened eyes, and the way she had wept over a simple bowl of porridge. Something very wrong had happened to that creature. And now her people were coming. Jinho did not know if they were coming to save her or to finish whatever had broken her so completely, but he knew one thing for certain: he was going to feed her again tomorrow, no matter what. Because that was the kind of person he had decided to be after Yuna died. He could not save everyone, but he could feed the hungry ones who crossed his path. That small act of kindness was the only thing that made sense to him anymore. Jinho turned off the lights and headed to his small quarters above the stall. Sleep would not come easily tonight, but that was nothing new. He had not slept well since the day he buried his daughter. At least now he had something to wake up for in the morning. A hungry dragon was waiting for breakfast.